My parents didn't have much education and could only do hard labor. So they placed great importance on my brothers and my education, and they scrimped and saved to send us to school. My mom often said that her father hadn't let her go to school, so she had no choice but to spend her life as a housewife, and she told us not to end up like her. She was willing to sacrifice everything to send us to college, just so we could have a good job in the future. After my brother got into a top high school, though we were a little hard up back home, my parents still asked others to buy all kinds of study materials and supplements for my brother. As for me, I was just a few points short of getting into high school, so my parents spent over 7,000 yuan to send me to high school. After graduation, I learned a trade and opened a small shop. Seeing all the other similar shops around me, I felt a lot of pressure. I thought it really wasn't easy to get a foothold in the market. I came to understand somewhat why my parents were willing to work hard to support our education. It was so we could get a better footing in society. I thought that if I had children, I would be a dutiful mother, work hard to earn money, and cultivate my children to study well. After I got married, I had a daughter, and I thought, I can't let my daughter lose at the starting line. Since I've given birth to her, I have to fulfill my responsibility as a mother, cultivate her properly, and do my best to pave the way for her, and to plan for her future. This way, she'll be able to get a good job and live a life without worrying about the basics. If I don't prepare for her future now, it'd be irresponsible of me as a mother. When my child was just learning to talk, I would tell her stories, read her classical poems, and teach her to recognize characters. And I even played children's English learning programs for her. My daughter started speaking early, and from a young age, she could already read storybooks by herself. Seeing how smart she was, I had more confidence in cultivating her properly, thinking that as she became successful, she would make me proud as a mother. When my daughter started kindergarten, I thought early education was very important for developing a child's intelligence. So I carefully chose a kindergarten that focused on mental arithmetic for her, and to ensure my child would have poise and physical beauty, I enrolled her in dance lessons at 5. When she was about to start elementary school, I asked someone to find the best school for her, and I made sure she had a homeroom teacher with good qualifications who taught high-quality classes. I worked hard to earn money to send my daughter to school. I worked from morning till night, and I often ate at irregular times. Sometimes I only ate one meal a day. Every time my daughter came home from school, I would rush her to finish her homework, and then I'd check it. And if I found a single mistake, I'd make her do 10 more problems as a penalty. Sometimes when I walked with my daughter on the street, we'd see people picking up trash, and I'd quietly say to my daughter, "If you don't study well, that's what you'll end up doing. Is that what you want?" And she'd just shake her head. Later, I discovered that my daughter really liked music, and that no matter the song, she could sing it after just 2 listens. I thought to myself, she still only has a child's voice, so it might be too early for her to learn vocal music. Let me have her learn an instrument first so that she'll be able to read music. That way, if she wants to keep going in music later on, it'll be easier. So, when she was in 2nd grade, I enrolled her in guzheng classes. At first, out of curiosity, my daughter agreed to learn the guzheng. But as she sat in front of the guzheng every day, practicing various finger techniques and playing monotonous notes, she became unwilling. She'd often pout and look at me with tears in her eyes, saying, "Mom, I don't want to practice anymore. I want to play for a while." But I'd coaxed her to keep practicing, and my daughter was left with no choice but to continue practicing through her tears. Seeing her feel so unfairly treated made me feel bad too, especially when I saw all my daughter's delicate fingers were covered in hangnails. I felt heartbroken and torn. I also wanted to let my daughter play freely, but society is focused on practical success and so unforgiving. And without a good education or skills, how would she make it in society? All the kids were working hard, and I couldn't let my daughter slack off. If she didn't want to be at the bottom of the pile later, she had to work hard now. And I had to take firm control for her and take responsibility. I just hoped my daughter could understand my painstaking considerations as a mother. Later, I often said to my daughter, "Now the competition in society is intense, and if your education isn't good and you don't have any special skills, then you'll just be looked down upon as being at the bottom of the pile. Mom wants you to learn the guzheng so that you'll have more job options in the future. You might not understand me now, but you will when you grow up." With resignation, my daughter said, "Mom, can you stop nagging me? I don't get to make any choices of my own. I just have to do everything you say." When I saw my daughter like this, I sometimes asked myself, is this really the right thing to do? At that time, I had already found God, and a sister also fellowshipped with me, telling me that we shouldn't be too demanding of our children and just do our part as parents. And as for whether our children will succeed or have a good career, this isn't up to parents and is all part of God's ordinations, and we should entrust everything to God. I felt that with such intense competition in society, if a person doesn't have a good education or special talents, it's really hard for them to gain a foothold. My daughter was quite talented, and if I didn't cultivate her properly, wouldn't she blame me for being irresponsible as a mother when she grew up? I didn't take my sister's advice seriously, and I continued to cultivate my daughter according to my own plan. While my daughter was learning the guzheng, I also enrolled her in other classes, such as English and writing. Weekends and holidays were the busiest times for my daughter, and every day it felt like she was rushing from one place to another, finishing one class and then hurrying off to the next. Every time my daughter saw children playing downstairs, she'd look at them with longing and envy, and she'd say, "Mom, I want to go play outside like the other kids. Aren't we supposed to have a day off on Sundays? But I'm busier now than on school days. When can I stop tiring myself out and just do whatever I want?" I said with resignation, "I know you're tired and that you want to relax and have fun, but while you'd be playing, other kids would be working hard and you could well fall behind. If you want a good future, you need to work hard now. You're still young, and so you don't understand how intense the competition in society is. You'll understand when you grow up." I used all kinds of methods to encourage her to study. My daughter worked hard to live up to my expectations, and her writing was published in the local paper. She learned the guzheng well and often performed and participated in competitions, and she also often performed in dance shows. I felt gratified by my daughter's successes and believed my efforts were justified. I felt that if my daughter had a good future, I would have fulfilled my responsibilities as a mother. Later, my daughter entered middle school, and I found a homeroom teacher with a high advancement rate for her. To ensure her studies weren't delayed, I vetted all the classmates my daughter interacted with at school, fearing that associating with less studious peers would affect her learning. My daughter often complained to me, "I'm like a bird in a cage. I don't have any freedom at all. Every day I'm just going from school to home to cram classes. All I ever do is study, study, study. Mom, do you know how that feels? I want to be free. Even the fish in our aquarium have more freedom than me. At least they can swim about in that great big tank they've got. I don't even have that much space." Every time my daughter complained like this, I'd feel torn. I knew she wasn't happy, but with such fierce competition in society, what else could I do? I could only try to persuade her patiently. It's not that I don't want to give you freedom. It's just that if you don't work hard now, how are you going to get ahead in life? You haven't entered society yet, so you don't understand how harsh the competition is. I've been through it, and I'm doing this for your own good. Every time my daughter heard this, she'd just stay silent. Gradually, I noticed my daughter was speaking less and less. And when she'd come home from school, she'd just lock herself in her room. I thought maybe she was going through a rebellious phase in adolescence, and that it would pass with time. I didn't expect that one day, when she was in her 3rd year of middle school, after just a few words, our conversation broke down completely. I saw my daughter on her phone sometimes, so I said to her, "Your classes are so intense right now, and the high school entrance exams are near. You should be on your phone less." Daughter said, "I'm just looking at it for a little while during my break." I continued, "What good is looking at your phone going to do you? It's just interfering with your studies." She was silent for a while, then suddenly screamed at me through her tears. "Why do I have to listen to everything you say? Have you ever thought about it? Have you ever given me freedom from when I was little until now? You've been controlling and manipulating everything in my entire life. You chose my school. You picked out my elementary and middle school homeroom teachers. You made me study dance, guzheng, writing English, and all sorts of other extracurricular classes. And I have to listen to everything you say. Have you ever even considered my feelings? Do you really even love me? I don't want to see you." That night, my daughter ran away from home. In that instant, I almost broke down. I just couldn't understand. Wasn't everything I'd done for her all for her own good? Why didn't my daughter understand what was in my heart? I was frantic with worry that something might happen to her. So I quickly called her close classmates to inquire about her whereabouts. They all said they didn't know. My heart was in my throat. Where could she have gone? Could she have done something rash? If something happened to her, how could I live with myself? I cried helplessly and prayed to God. "God, my child is angry and has run away, and I'm afraid something will happen to her. God, please help keep my heart calm. I know that this situation is allowed by you, but I don't understand what lesson I should learn from this. Please guide me to understand your intention." 3 or 4 days later, my daughter sent word saying that she didn't want to come home and that the last person she wanted to see was me. Hearing this, I felt like I was being stabbed through the heart, and tears poured down my face. I had always thought of myself as a responsible and dutiful mother, and ever since my daughter had been born, I had planned everything for her, wanting her to grow up without problems and to have a good job in the future. But after everything I'd done for her, all I received in return was her shunning and hating me. I felt like I utterly failed as a mother. I'd often cry alone in secret. And during my most helpless moments, I'd pour out my inner pain and confusion to God. At that moment, I read God's latest words, in which He fellowships about the 6 junctures in a human life, and instantly they unraveled the knot in my heart. I read God's words.
Almighty God says, "Besides giving birth and raising them, the responsibility parents bear in one's life is just to externally provide them with an environment to grow up in, and that's it. Because it is only the Creator's preordination that has a bearing on any person's fate. What kind of future someone will have isn't something that can be controlled by any person. It is preordained long in advance, and not even one's parents can change their fate. As far as fate is concerned, everyone is independent. Everyone has their own fate. So no one's parents can thwart their fate in life at all, nor can they do anything to help them along when it comes to the role they play in life. It can be said that no matter what family one is preordained to be born into, and what environment one grows up in, these are nothing more than the preconditions for completing their mission in life. They do not in any way determine a person's fate in life or the kind of destiny within which they complete their mission. Thus, no one's parents can assist them in completing their mission in life, nor can any relative help them fulfill their role in life. How one completes their mission and in what kind of living environment they take on their role hinge entirely on their fate in life. In other words, no objective conditions can influence anyone's mission as preordained by the Creator. Everyone reaches maturity in the particular environment in which they grow up. Then, step by step, they embark upon their own path in life and fulfill the destiny arranged for them by the Creator. Naturally and automatically, they enter the vast sea of mankind and assume their post in life, and, for the sake of the Creator's preordination and the sake of His sovereignty, they begin to fulfill their responsibilities as a created being. When a person leaves their parents and becomes independent, the social environment they face and the kinds of jobs and careers they encounter are all predetermined and have nothing to do with their parents. Some people choose a good major in college and end up finding a plum job after graduation. It can be said that they get off to a flying start on the path of life. Others learn and master many different skills and yet never find a job that suits them or the position for them. Much less do they build a career of their own. It can be said that these people's first step in life is marked by setbacks and rough patches, their prospects dismal and their lives uncertain. Some others apply themselves diligently to their studies, yet narrowly miss every chance to receive a higher education. They seem doomed to never achieve success. It can be said that their very first hopes on the path of life go up in smoke. Not knowing whether the road ahead is smooth or rocky, they feel for the first time how unpredictable human destiny is, and so face life with a mixture of dread and expectation. Others are not very well educated, yet they can write books, achieving a measure of fame. And others are almost entirely illiterate, yet can make money in business and are thereby able to support themselves. Regardless of differences in their abilities and intelligence, and whether or not they have resolve, people are all equal before fate, where they're not distinguished between great and small, high and low, exalted and mean. What occupation one engages in, what one does for a living, and how much wealth one has in life does not come down to their parents, their talents, or their efforts and ambitions. It comes down to the Creator's preordination.
After reading God's words, I understood that parents' responsibilities include giving birth to and raising their children. But as for their children's fate, career, or whether they will be poor or rich, these are not things parents can change. The fate God has ordained for a person is what it is, and no one can change this. I did not understand God's sovereignty, and I thought that since society's competition is so intense, to gain a foothold in society, a person must have education or a skill. Otherwise, they'll be stuck living a hard life. And that if I didn't cultivate my daughter properly, I wouldn't have fulfilled my responsibility as a mother. Because I held on to this wrong view, I started planning her future when she was very young. I chose the best kindergarten for her and enrolled her in classes for various skills. And while other children were playing outside, my daughter was running between classes. At a young age, she was already shackled, and she lived out her days like a robot. She was pushed forward step by step by the plan I'd set for her. And this made her lose the childhood happiness she was meant to have. Because I worked from dawn to dusk to earn money, for a long time I was eating irregularly, and this led to stomach problems. I not only suffered in silence, but I even pushed my daughter to run away from home. All of this was caused by my failure to understand God's sovereignty. Although I believed in God, I believed in His sovereignty and word only. And in reality, I didn't truly believe in God's words. And I didn't view people or things, or act and conduct myself according to God's requirements, leaving both my child and me exhausted, and suffering in both body and mind. I never reflected on whether my way of educating my daughter was actually right. Could it really change my child's future? When I thought back, my grades weren't terrible at school, and I thought I could go to a teacher training university and secure a stable job in the future. But unexpectedly, I failed my college entrance exam and didn't get in anywhere. After graduating, I learned a craft, and I originally planned to open a clothing factory. But the clothing industry wasn't doing well, so I had to change careers and opened a hair salon. I was thinking of expanding, but for various reasons, I let it go. Step by step, I'd arrived where I was, and none of it had happened according to my plans. I couldn't even change my own fate, so how could I change my daughter's? My daughter's fate had already been ordained by God when she was born, and what kind of job she'd have in future and whether she'd live a good life had all been ordained by God. No matter how well I planned or how comprehensively I cultivated and educated her, I couldn't change her fate. I didn't recognize God's sovereignty or ordinations, and I thought I could change her fate through my own effort to cultivate and educate her. I was truly pitiful and ignorant. Everything I did for my daughter seemed right on the surface, and I was making plans for her future. But in fact, what I was doing went beyond the responsibilities of a parent. I was acting in opposition to God's sovereignty and arrangements. I then read God's words.
Almighty God says, where a person will go, what they will do, what people or situations they'll encounter, what things they'll say, and what will happen during each day. Are these things they can predict? It can be said that people not only cannot foresee all these occurrences, but even more so, they cannot control how things develop. In people's daily lives, these unforeseeable things are far from novel. They are common occurrences. The occurrence of these trivial affairs of daily life and the means and laws of their development are constant reminders to people. Nothing that happens is a coincidence. The course of the development and the inevitability of whatever happens cannot be shifted by human will. The occurrence of everything that happens conveys an admonition from the Creator to mankind, and it sends the message that humans cannot control their own fates. At the same time, it is a strike back against people's futile ambition and desire to take fate into their own hands. This strike is like a powerful slap hitting the face of mankind over and over, forcing people to reflect on who exactly holds sovereignty over and governs their fates. And as their ambitions and desires are constantly dashed and shattered, people cannot help but unconsciously go along with the arrangements of fate and accept reality, the will of heaven, and the Creator's sovereignty. The tragedy of man is not that he pursues a happy life, not that he pursues fame and gain, or that he struggles against his own fate through a haze, but that after he has seen the Creator's existence and has learned the fact that the Creator has sovereignty over human fate, he still cannot turn back from the wrong path, cannot pull his feet out of the mire, but hardens his heart and persists stubbornly in his errors. He would rather keep thrashing in the mud, wrestling obstinately against the Creator's sovereignty, resisting it until the end, all without the slightest attitude of contrition. It is only when he lies broken and bleeding that he at last decides to give up and turn back. This is the true tragedy of man. So I say, those who choose to submit are wise, while those who choose to break away are foolish and stubborn.
After reading God's words, I started to reflect on myself, looking back on how I cultivated my daughter. I always believed that as long as I planned my daughter's future and carried out that plan, she would be sure to succeed in her career. After finding God, brothers and sisters fellowshipped with me that a child's future is ordained by God, that parents cannot control this, and that we should submit to God's orchestrations and arrangements. But I still held on to my own views, believing that whether my daughter would succeed in her career depended on her hard work. The people of the world don't believe in God's sovereignty, and they think that one's destiny is in one's own hands. They believe that only by enduring hardship can one rise above others, and blindly resist the Creator's ordinations and sovereignty. Even though I believed in God, I didn't believe in His sovereignty over human fate. And I had the same perspective as non-believers, wanting to change my daughter's fate through human effort. In what way was I a believer? My views were just like those of disbelievers. I was truly unworthy of living before God. I was well aware that God is the Lord of all creation and sovereign over and controls everything. But for the sake of my own selfish desires, I stubbornly wanted to break free from God's sovereignty and change my daughter's future. This brought much pain and harm to both my daughter and me. And what's more, this was resisting God's ordinations. Realizing this, I no longer wanted to resist God's sovereignty. and I became willing to place my daughter in God's hands. Whether she does well or poorly in her studies, I would be willing to submit. After praying, I felt more at peace in my heart. Not long after, my daughter returned. She said she was working at a restaurant. Seeing that my daughter had lost weight, I asked sadly, "Are you going to leave again?" My daughter nodded, choking back tears. I controlled myself to keep my tears back, and I said, "It's so hard out there. Why don't you come back home?" My daughter cried and said, "I don't have any freedom here." My daughter's answer was like a knife cutting into my flesh, and I felt like my heart was breaking. Wasn't this all because I pushed her? I deprived my child of her freedom and happiness, to the point where she'd rather go out and suffer than return home. In what way was I a dutiful mother? I couldn't hold back my tears any longer, and I hugged my daughter, crying uncontrollably. My daughter cried bitterly as well, and I said, "I was wrong. I wasn't a good mom. I shouldn't have pressured you so much. I deprived you of all your freedom at home, and I caused you so much pain. Please come home. I won't pressure you to study all the things you've been studying anymore." After my daughter came back, I no longer pressured her to study like before. I let her develop naturally, and I focused more on caring for her everyday needs and daily life, and I talked with her about faith. Gradually, my daughter spoke more and became much more cheerful, and the house became filled with laughter. One day, my daughter said, "Mom, you've changed. You don't pressure me to study like before." I said, "This small change in me is due to the guidance of God's words. From God's word, I've come to understand that my responsibility is to raise you healthily and to provide you with proper education and thought. Whether you will succeed academically or get a foothold in society in the future is all arranged and ordained by God. I was wrong for pressuring you before. It caused both of us so much pain, but don't worry, I won't pressure you again." My daughter and I both cried. Later, my daughter enrolled in a vocational school and was always among the top students in her exams. She called me almost every night, telling me about everything that had happened at school that day, and our relationship became like that of friends. I truly felt in my heart how good it is to practice according to God's words. Later, I read more of God's words, and I gained some discernment of whether my expectations of my daughter had been reasonable.
Almighty God says, "All parents place certain expectations on their children, regardless of whether these expectations are great or small, and regardless of whether they can or cannot be realized. They all actually embody an attitude and specific requirements that parents have toward such aspects as their children's self-conduct, actions, lives, or how their children treat them. These specific requirements are, from the perspective of children, things that they ought to do, because, based on traditional notions, children cannot go against the orders of their parents. If they do, then they are unfilial. Consequently, many people carry heavy burdens regarding this matter. So, there are truth principles that should be understood and observed regarding whether the specific expectations that parents have for their offspring are reasonable or not, and whether parents ought to have these expectations or not. Which of these expectations are reasonable? Which are unreasonable? Which are legitimate? Which are illegitimate and forced? How people should approach parental expectations. and how they should decide whether to accept or reject them, and the perspective and attitude with which they should face and handle such matters. Most parents believe that it is their responsibility and obligation to place expectations on their children and offspring, and that if they placed no expectations on their children, it would be the same as not fulfilling their responsibilities or obligations, and the same as not doing what parents ought to do. They think that this would make them bad parents, irresponsible parents. So people involuntarily generate various expectations and requirements for their children. They have different requirements for different children at different times. As parents, since they have this kind of viewpoint, idea, and burden when it comes to treating their children, they do the things that they ought to do according to these unwritten rules, no matter whether they are right or wrong. Parents make requirements of their children while treating these approaches as a kind of obligation and responsibility, and at the same time, they force these requirements upon their children, making their children achieve them. Regardless of how great parents' expectations are for their children, and regardless of how justified and natural parents may believe their expectations for their children to be, as long as these expectations go against God's intentions, go against God's sovereignty and arrangements, and are not genuine submission to God, then they are something people should let go of. It can be said that these expectations are negative things. They are not proper, and still less are they positive. Rather, they go against parental responsibilities and exceed the scope of those responsibilities. They are expectations for and demands on children that are unrealistic and run contrary to humanity. Some abnormal actions and manifestations, as well as some extreme behavior displayed by parents toward their children who are not yet adults, lead to all kinds of negative influences and pressures on their children, causing some damage to their young children's spiritual, physical, and mental well-being. From these facts, we can see that it is inappropriate and contrary to God's required principles for humans. Anyone who is sensible should let go of these thoughts and ways of acting. This is because, from the perspective of humanity, they are a cruel and inhuman way to wreck the physical and mental well-being of people who have not yet reached adulthood.
God exposes that when parents treat their unreasonable expectations and demands on their children as responsibilities and obligations that they must fulfill for their children, and then they force children to meet them, this harms and ruins children. I reflected on myself. Since childhood, I'd seen how much my parents sacrificed to ensure we would have good jobs in the future, and I truly admired my parents and thought they were dutiful. And I thought that when I had children, I would do the same as my parents, and that I'd be a responsible and good mother. After my daughter was born, I thought that since my daughter was so young, she didn't know about the harsh reality and brutality of social competition, and that as I'd been through it, I had to plan for her future and pave the way ahead for her. And even if it involved some suffering or exhaustion, I had to scrimp and save money and do everything I could to educate and cultivate her so she could be multi-talented and have a bright future. I thought this was my responsibility and obligation as a mother. I followed my plan to educate and cultivate my daughter, signing her up for various extracurricular classes, and even vetting her interactions with classmates to not delay her studies. I often gave her advice from my own experience. And even when my daughter complained about being tired and having no freedom, I would try to coax and persuade her to struggle through this temporary hardship. I never thought there was anything wrong with this. I believed I was doing this for her own good and being responsible for her. Even when my brothers and sisters fellowshipped with me, I wouldn't reconsider, and I didn't think about my daughter's feelings at all. I didn't think about how she was a child or about what she needed at her age, and I just imposed my own expectations on her, placing enormous pressure, constraints, and pain upon her young heart and mind. I wasn't fulfilling my responsibilities or obligations as a mother in this, and my actions were entirely based on unreasonable human expectations. I treated all my expectations as a mother's responsibility and forced my daughter to the point of running away from home. My so-called responsibility brought pain to both me and my daughter. One day, a sister I was partnered with asked me, "You always thought that cultivating your daughter was fulfilling a mother's responsibility, but you never let her do what she enjoyed, and instead you demanded that she meet your expectations. Isn't there some kind of corrupt disposition behind this?" I brought this question before God in prayer, and I read His words.
Almighty God says, "What are these parental expectations based upon? Where do they come from? They come from society and the world. The point of all these parental expectations is to enable children to adapt to this world and society, to avoid being weeded out of the world and society, and to establish themselves in society, to get a secure job, a stable family, and a stable future. So parents have various subjective expectations for their offspring. For example, right now, it's quite popular to be a computer engineer. Some people say, "My son must become a computer engineer in the future. People who work in this field can earn a lot of money, and it makes their parents look good too." When children don't have a thorough understanding of society or work, parents go ahead and choose careers or plan the future for them. Isn't this wrong? These parents are placing expectations on their children entirely according to their own preferences and desires. Isn't this subjective? Saying it's subjective is putting it nicely. What is it really? What is another interpretation of this subjectivity? Is it not selfishness? Isn't it coercion? You like a certain occupation. You would like to be an official, to get rich, to be glamorous and successful in society. So you make your children also seek to be such a person and walk such a path. But it's hard to say whether they will be able to do that job in the future, or whether that job really suits them. And what exactly is their destiny then? How will God hold sovereignty over them and make arrangements for them? Do you know these things? Some people say, "I don't care about those things. As long as it's something that I, as a parent, like, then it's fine. Since I like it, I place expectations of this sort on them." Isn't that too selfish? To put it nicely, it's very subjective. It's only listening to oneself. But what is it in reality? It is very selfish. These parents don't consider their children's caliber or talents, and they don't care about the arrangements that God has for each person's destiny and life. They don't consider these things. They just force their own preferences and plans onto their children out of wishful thinking. Some people say, if I don't make these arrangements, their future will be impacted. They are young and naive, and by the time they understand, it will all be too late. As a parent, I have to worry about my children and arrange everything for them. This is a parent's responsibility. There's nothing wrong with this statement, but if your plans and arrangements are not what your children need, but things you impose on them, then that's not appropriate. The plans and arrangements of many parents for their children all come to nothing. What is the reason for this? It is because the parents do not truly understand their children. They do not know what path their children will walk in their lives or what kind of person they will become. In that case, are such arrangements not blind arrangements? Many people choose good majors when they study, but why are they unable to work in a related field after they graduate? This is entirely determined by a person's destiny. In this, there is God's sovereignty and arrangements. As for what kind of career a person should choose, what kind of life path they should choose, no one can see through to these things. Each person's destiny has its own pace and its own laws, and they have nothing to do with their parents. You are making your children bear this pressure early on so that they might endure less of that hardship in the future, making them bear this pressure starting at an age where they still don't understand anything. Is it really the case that they will amount to something because they've endured this pressure? If they fail to acquire any proper skills or knowledge, won't it all be useless? Making them bear pressure from a young age is not beneficial to their physical and mental health. If it brings some illnesses and consequences, is that not harming them? Are you really doing this for their own good? It's not necessarily a bad thing that they don't understand. At least they can live a few years in a comfortable, simple, and happy way. If, from a young age, they could see through these things and began to bear these pressures, it would not necessarily be a good thing for them.
From God's words, I saw that the unreasonable expectations parents have for their children are influenced by evil trends in society, and that all these things are from Satan. Just like in my case, I had little education and no special skills, and I could only barely scrape out a living through my own efforts in society, while those with high education or special skills suffer less and could live a life without worrying about the essentials and using their brains and speaking. I was influenced by the misleading and deceptive satanic philosophies of other pursuits are small, books excel them all, knowledge can change your fate, and those who toil with their minds govern others, and those who toil with their hands are governed by others. I thought that only knowledge and special skills could change one's fate and lead to a good life. So with my experience, I took it upon myself to make plans for my young daughter, forcing her to learn knowledge and skills without considering in the slightest whether these were things my daughter liked. I was solely focused on cultivating my daughter to become a talented and outstanding person. Satan uses these philosophies to mislead people, making me mistakenly believe that only knowledge could change one's fate. And all I could think about was how to cultivate my daughter to change her fate. Looking back, I realized that what I did had no real meaning, that God had already ordained what my daughter will become. and that no one can change that. I had no discernment of Satan's corrupt methods or malicious intentions, and I willfully forced my daughter to act as I wished. As a result, my daughter at such a young age bore so much pressure and pain, and her once innocent and carefree childhood was ruined by my selfishness. Was I not harming my child? On the surface, it seemed like I was considering my daughter's future. But in reality, I was imposing my own preferences and desires on her, all for my own selfish desires and to bring myself glory. I was truly selfish. I could hardly bear to think, if it weren't for God's words guiding me, what would have happened to my daughter if I continued binding and suppressing her? Realizing this, I sincerely thanked God for enlightening and guiding me, allowing me to understand my corrupt nature a bit more. I read more of God's words.
Almighty God says, through dissecting the essence of parents' expectations for their children, we can see that these expectations are selfish, that they go against humanity, and that they have nothing to do with the responsibilities of parents. When parents impose all sorts of expectations and requirements on their children, they place a great deal of extra pressure on them. This is not them fulfilling their responsibilities. So, what are the responsibilities that parents ought to fulfill? At least, they should teach their children to be honest people who speak the truth and do things in an honest manner, and teach them to be kind-hearted and not to do bad things, guiding them in a positive direction. These are their most basic responsibilities. In addition, they should guide their children in studying practical knowledge and skills, and so on, based on their caliber and conditions. If parents believe in God and understand the truth, they should get their children to read God's words and accept the truth, so they come to know the Creator and understand that people are created by God and that God exists in this universe. They should lead their children in praying to God and eating and drinking the words of God, so that they can understand some truths, so that after they grow up, they will be able to believe in God, follow God, and do the duty of a created being rather than chasing worldly trends, getting trapped within various complicated interpersonal relationships, and being enticed, corrupted, and devastated by the various evil trends of this world. These are really the responsibilities that parents should fulfill. The responsibilities they should fulfill are to, in their role as parents, provide their children with positive guidance and appropriate assistance before they reach adulthood, as well as to promptly care for them in their physical lives with regard to daily necessities.
God's words pointed out a path of practice to me, and I now knew how to properly treat my children. Parents should provide proper upbringing and education according to the child's needs at different ages. When children are young, they need their parents to teach them how to conduct themselves, how to have normal human thoughts, how to be a kind person, and for their parents to take good care of their health, so that they can grow up healthily into adulthood. Parents shouldn't impose wrong thoughts, pressures, and burdens on them. And when possible, they can tell them how God created the heavens and earth and all things, how He works to lead and save people, and they can guide them to believe in God and provide them with positive direction and help. This is also the responsibility and obligation of a parent. Now, my daughter is not working in a field related to her specialty, and my older sister asked me to persuade my daughter to find a job based on her specialty. But I know that whatever job my daughter does, God has already ordained it. I can give advice to my daughter, but she is free to choose as she wishes. I then shared my thoughts with my daughter. My daughter said, "I like my current job." I said, "Since you say so, I respect your choice." It was an easy conversation to have with her, and there wasn't any coercion or pressure. I came to experience that practicing according to God's words is truly liberating. Thank God for His guidance.